Hello and welcome to this video on break-even and break-even charts. So far we've looked at the financial position of a business, and we said that break-even exists when total revenue equals total costs. We also said that to work out the break-even output, the number of units a firm needs to sell in order to break even, we use this formula: fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. In this video we're going to take it a little bit further and look at the strengths and weaknesses of break-even analysis, and then look at an important area of theme 2, which is a break-even chart, how to construct it and how to interpret it. Let's start off with the strengths of break-even analysis. Why would a firm want to do a break-even analysis? What are the real advantages to a firm of knowing your break-even output? Well, first of all, it allows you to set goals and targets. If you know as a business that to survive you need to break even, i.e. not make a loss, then knowing your break-even output is a key bit of information, and you should set that as one of your basic targets to meet in your first few years of trading. Secondly, hopefully we'd all agree now that it's quite quick and quite easy. With your fixed costs, your selling price and your variable cost per unit, quite quickly you could work out your break-even output and then use that information. So it's fairly straightforward to do. Thirdly, you can try things. What happens if wages increase? What will be the impact on how we break even? Or what will be the impact on profit? It can be quite quick to do little scenarios and see what the impact would be. So you could look at the worst case, you could look at the best case, and get an idea of what that means in terms of how many units you need to sell in order to break even. So it's a useful thing for a business to do. Of course, there are some weaknesses as well of doing this analysis. The first one is, well, how do we know exactly what price we're going to charge? We might assume at the start we're going to be able to charge, £10 per item, but in reality it might only be £5 once we've tested the market and we've seen the sort of response we're getting from customers. So the information may be unreliable, and so your break-even analysis might be quite unrealistic. Secondly, the break-even analysis assumes there that every unit we make is also sold, which you could question. And thirdly, some assumptions might change as we sell more. So fixed costs. We know fixed costs don't change with input, with the level of output, but they could possibly change in the future if we were to expand and open a new factory. The selling price might change. Competitors might open up and we have to reduce our selling price. These things might change, and so that would change the validity of the assumptions that we've made, and it would change the outcome of our break-even analysis. Okay, now we're going to move on and look at break-even charts. Now the key thing really to remember with a break-even chart is that it's a plan. It's a plan of what might happen to the business financially. And we're going to use an example here to go through this. We're going to start off again with looking at some of Esher College's delicious cupcakes, and we're going to assume three things. We're going to assume that the cupcake, the fixed costs of the canteen, making a cupcake, are £4,000. So the heating, the lighting, buying the ovens, that kind of stuff. The variable costs, the sprinklings, the dough, the icing, etc., they all cost 80p per cupcake. And the selling price, pretty pricey, yes, £4 per cake, but they are particularly delicious. So a break-even chart, unsurprisingly, looks like a chart. And here what we have on the y-axis, y to the sky, this one going up here, is pounds. So we have costs, we have revenues, we can show profit. Anything to do with money is on this axis on the side. Along the bottom we've got the number of cupcakes produced, so 500 cupcakes, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. And the key to remember here is this is a plan. This is how many cupcakes the canteen might produce. We don't know how many they actually have produced. This is how many they might produce over a given period of time. And so using this chart we can then plot and have a look at the financial projections using only these three bits of information. So the first thing we're going to plot is the fixed costs. The fixed costs are £4,000. So let's ask ourselves, if we don't produce any cupcakes, how much would we have to pay out in fixed costs? Well, £4,000. If we produced 1,000 cupcakes, how much would we have to pay out in fixed costs? £4,000. If we produced 2,000 cupcakes, how much? £4,000. Any amount of cupcakes we produce, the fixed costs are what they are. The fixed costs are £4,000. So a line to indicate that would look like this, a horizontal line which indicates the level of fixed costs we would be paying for any number of cupcakes we might produce. And so I would suggest in your notes that you sketch the assumptions and sketch this diagram as we build it up in this example. Okay, the second thing we're going to plot is the second category of costs, which is the variable costs. Now the variable costs we have estimated are going to be 80p per cake we make. Now if we don't make any cakes, how much money will we spend on variable costs? We don't make any cakes, 80p per cake, but 0 cakes made, that would be nothing. We would spend £0. If we made 1,000 cupcakes and it's 80p per cake, how much would we spend on variable costs? We would make 1,000 cupcakes, 80p per cake, we would spend £800. If we made 2,000 cupcakes, how much would we spend on variable costs? We would spend 80 pence per cake, 2,000 cakes, £1,600. So we could do that for any number of cupcakes that we might make, and we could draw a line, and the line would represent to us how the variable costs are going to increase over time. So we have variable costs, we have fixed costs. We can then say, well, let's draw a line that shows us what our total costs would look like for any number of cupcakes that we might produce. Well, as we know, total costs are the fixed costs plus the variable costs. If I add these two lines together, I will get a line that gives us the total cost for any number of cupcakes produced. If no cupcakes are produced, it's just the fixed costs plus 0 variable costs, 4,000. If 1,000 cupcakes are produced, it is 4,000 fixed costs plus 800 variable costs, so £4,800 in total, and so on and so on. So this total cost line represents how the cost to the business would increase as and when we would make more and more cupcakes throughout this time period. Okay. Remember, this is just a plan. We don't know exactly how many we're going to make in reality. This is a plan before we start. Right, so we looked at money going out here. This is a cost. So we've got costs on our graph. The last thing to add is the revenue. And we know that we sell our cupcakes for £4 each. That is the selling price. So if we don't sell any cupcakes, unsurprisingly, our revenue would be 0. If we sold 1,000 cupcakes and we're charging £4 per cupcake, our revenue would be £4,000. If we sold 2,000 cupcakes and our price is £4, our revenue would be £8,000. So again, just as for costs on this line, on this chart, we can draw a line which indicates how our revenues would increase as we sell more cupcakes. And you can see this line here, revenue line, is a bit steeper than the cost line over there. So that's it. Those are all the lines. That's how we put together a break-even chart. So a break-even chart shows us revenue and costs, and that's broken down a little bit more into fixed costs and variable costs. And so it's called a break-even chart. So at what point here would the business be breaking even? At what point where is the break-even point on this chart? You might want to pause the video for a second, have a look at the chart, and see if you can work out where the break-even point would be. Well, break-even, as we defined it, is where revenue equals costs. So where on this chart are revenues and costs the same number? Well, if we go down here, costs here are about costs here at 500 are over £4,000, revenues about 3,000. They're not the same. At what point are they the same? This point here. This point here on our diagram is the break-even point. At this point here, revenues and costs are both approximately £5,000. So that's the break-even point, and from that point we can work out the break-even output, the number of cupcakes that would need to be sold to reach this point. So a little dotted line down from our break-even point would tell us that 1,250 cupcakes need to be sold to reach break-even. And we could check that. We could check it by using our old formula, fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. And if we do that formula, fixed cost 4,000 divided by contribution per unit, same price minus variable cost per unit, gives us the same answer, exactly what we would expect. So we could have used this formula, that would have been fine, we could have worked it out, but this chart here tells us a lot more, because we can look at not just the break-even point, we can start to look at more information to do with the finances of the business, the financial performance of our business. We can start to see if we go beyond 1,250 cupcakes, if we start to sell more cupcakes, if we get up to 1,500, if we go to 2,000, we can start to see how our profits might grow, and our profits are the gap between revenues and costs. So as we go beyond the break-even point, we get a feel for how the profits might increase. Also, if it's bad news and we don't reach break-even, we can have a similar indication of what our losses might be. If we don't get to the break-even number, 1,250. If we only sell 500, what would our losses look like? If we only sell 20, heaven forbid, what would our losses look like? Again, this area here can give us an indication, gives an idea, help with our planning, help us understand our business financially and look at potentially the level of loss. Okay, the next topic to look at is the margin of safety. This concept of the margin of safety is once we know how many we've actually sold. Remember, the break-even chart is a plan. It looks at how the business might perform financially given different levels of output. But if we know how many we actually sell, the margin of safety is simply the difference between how many has been actually sold and the break-even output. How safe are we? How big is that gap, the margin, from the safety of not making a loss? So again, on our diagram, if we know that we've actually sold 2,000 cupcakes, the gap between what we've actually sold and the break-even output and the margin of safety would be 750, the difference between the actual output and the break-even output. So break-even is very useful for entrepreneurs to do and for businesses to understand and get a feel for, and likewise break-even charts. There's a lot of information that they can gain from it. So what I'd like you to do is just come up with a few ideas as to why break-even analysis might be important for an entrepreneur setting up a new business. Why might that be an important thing for them to do? So pause the video, have a quick think to yourself, jot some ideas down, and then once you're ready, click to continue. Well, break-even analysis might be useful because it's really a way of sense checking, making sure the business plan makes sense and it's all realistic. Are the break-even levels of output realistic? If you're forecasting your first year of business that you need to sell 10 billion cupcakes to break even, this doesn't sound like a very realistic business. Maybe your assumptions have to change, or maybe the business is just not feasible. So it's a good way of seeing, is your business likely to succeed? You can also have a look at the worst case and the best case scenario on your break-even chart. If things go really, really well, we sell thousands of cupcakes, what would our profits be? If things don't go so well, we only sell a few hundred, well, what would our losses be? It's a good way for the business, for the entrepreneur to work out what the best case and the worst case scenario might look like. And the last thing is you can check, do some quick changes. What if I raise the price a little bit? How does that alter my total revenue line? What impact does that have on the break-even output? What if I was managed to lower my variable costs? What impact would that have on the cost line? What impact would that have on the break-even level of output? So again, you can run scenarios, change assumptions, and see what happens. So talking about changing assumptions and running different scenarios, in this table we have changes the business might make on the left-hand side, and then we have effect on the break-even chart and impact on break-even output. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and see if you can work out what phrases would go in the boxes where the gaps are. Well, this would be the impact of changing those assumptions on the left-hand side. Reducing variable costs, the cost line would pivot downwards, and so you would need less output to break even. If you were to reduce the fixed costs, the fixed cost line would come down, the total cost line would come down in parallel, and again a smaller output is necessary to break even. If you were to raise the selling price, the revenue line would get steeper, break even output would be achieved quicker, so a smaller output is needed to break even. And for raising the variable costs, raising the fixed costs, and fall in selling price, the opposite impact on break even is the case. So, in this video, we've looked at some of the strengths and weaknesses of break-even analysis. We've looked at how to construct a break-even chart, and we looked at interpreting a break-even chart and discussing whether break-even is a good thing for a business to do, whether it's something an entrepreneur should do at the start of setting out a new business. That's it. Thanks very much.